relief. With such a large newcomer population, we have a ton of students whose families don't qualify for the state and federal assistance, and so have been kind of carrying that extra burden of needing financial support along the way. And so, you know, getting all of that mapped out, getting all those things tracked has been a huge kind of uphill battle. And then, you know, something else we've been really trying to struggle with is, you know, just a kid having a device and having internet access is not enough for them to be able to do their work. It has been taking probably on average 45 minutes per student to explain to them how to use Google Classroom, how to connect via Zoom, how to email their teachers questions. For a huge portion of our population, they had never really engaged via email and the internet before. And so it's just taken a lot of TLC to keep our students motivated and to keep our staff motivated to know that, you know, it's worth it. That connection is really important. And even if they're not doing all of their assignments, they have learned so many life skills along the way. And our community has come together in this kind of really beautiful way. But it's definitely still a work in progress. And that's just on the student side. There's been a ton of support on the teacher side to help ease anxieties and to help lift up, you know, bright spots in practice for how to shift towards really focusing on core skills while maintaining a sense of community in an online space. And so, you know, I think we've done a pretty good job, but of course, there's always a million more things to do. And, you know, it's kind of always kind of taking a sip of that ambiguity soup and just being kind of okay with like not being perfect has been kind of our approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know, Stevon, I want to kind of go right to you because you brought this up kind of in your intro. 2 weeks ago, the school board proposed giving students, all students, A's. Understandably, the reaction, there was a large public outcry from this, from parents, teachers, and other members of the educational community, both in favor and against. How are you balancing all of this feedback as a commissioner, and where do you sit on this policy now? I know, as you know, Sarah just mentioned that, you know, students are having a lot of challenges with just kind of getting up to speed with how to learn in this digital way. So I understand that the commission is trying to find a way of kind of assessing students at this time, but kind of how are you balancing all the feedback you're getting from the community?
Yeah, the Board of Education voted on the resolution in our last meeting to take a credit, no credit grading policy. When we had a discussion after the initial meeting about proposing all A's, that wasn't a law. It was a suggestion to go back and find out more information from our legal team about if it was actually possible. And so through that process, this is actually really interesting. So I'll talk about it a little bit because this is kind of what went into the decision. We have what the California Education Code allows, which is different from what the college entry process will take. And so we're talking about balancing. We had, you know, our legal requirements based on the Education Code and entry requirements, which is sort of outside of the realm of anything we have to do with. The UC system and the CSU system is, you know, they have sort of a criteria of how they're considering who to admit, and it's GPA scores based. I mean, a lot of us probably went through it coming up or are familiar with it. So after we made the suggestion of all A's, the reason why it was actually not possible was because in the California Education Code, the Board of Education can determine what the general criteria is, but we can't assign an actual grade. The freedom to grade is based on the teacher's discretion. So we can say pass, no pass, but we can't determine if a kid can actually pass or not pass. So that's what ended up driving the decision to go to credit, no credit. Now, the debate around all A's was really interesting. I have an interview with Jeff Duncan Andrade. He's a really well-known educator in the city on YouTube at Cook on Monday Morning that people can check out. He was on the all A side. And I talked to people like Sarah, who wasn't, along with many others, understandably. And people had real concerns. I was just actually, and I see Sabo on the line. I was just talking to her and her son about, he brought up the grade policy, and his teacher said that if you have over 70%, don't talk to me. And he was like, well, what if I wanted 80%? He's like thinking like, what if I wanted 90%? So even we have so much inertia, and we've been conditioned so heavily to rely on grades that this is just my opinion on the matter. Stepping away from that was really unnerving and unsettling to a lot of people. And the discussion about why go to school and why learn was so heavily emphasized, like grades are the tool that we must have in order to push outcomes. Like that was, that's a real thing. And it's also troubling. We talk about self-actualization, and I won't get into this too deeply, but we can talk about this offline with other people that want to have the discussion more. But there's a lot wrapped up in what grades mean, why we grade, and if it's actually a measure of knowledge and competency, and that varies within each school, across schools, et cetera. So that's where we landed in terms of the discussion. The discussion was based on, can we actually give all A's? The answer is no. And then the other part of the discussion is, what will UC accept? And they sort of gave us suggestions based on that. So what we ended up landing on is credit, no credit, and that will just be for this semester for all students, 6th grade through 12th grade.
Got it. I'm wondering if, Thea and Michelle, when you heard about this potential policy, if you had any thoughts that came to mind when you heard about it.
Well, Michelle, if you don't mind, I'll say a word or two. The first thing that came to my mind, and I think this is an issue that's come up a lot with COVID-19, and that's whose job is it to make these decisions? Because, and in particular, not thinking so much about this decision, but I don't know if you all remember when Gavin Newsom told us all that we were going to be going back to school for the K through 12 in July. And I read the Chronicle, and Tony Thurman, who is our elected education guy, said, first I've ever heard of it. And I feel like during this COVID time, it's been interesting for us all to sort of figure out, where do we need to step in and where do we not need to step in. In the case of City College, there is a participative governance committee that it's working its way through the process as to exactly what we're going to do with grading. And I think if the trustees weigh in at all, it's going to be probably to accept whatever their decision is, which I'm not sure that the decision has been made, but I think it's going to be pass, not pass, is my guess, is the decision. So I think that's kind of what has been brought up to me a lot during this time of COVID, is I think we're all sort of freaking out, and there's a desire to provide leadership where maybe there isn't, and sometimes maybe to step in when there's already a process that could still be in place that we could take advantage of. My kid's already graduated, so
Yeah, when this issue came up for in the district, and there was lots of parent talk, and I know Stevon received lots of emails from parents and comments. I think what was really important about the intention of the school board, and most of what I heard from people, was that we are in an unprecedented time, and we have to hold harmless the students, right? We're in a situation where everybody is not under normal conditions. Our teachers had never been taught to teach remotely. How would we possibly evaluate students or teachers in a situation which they were not trained for, and in which we don't have regular daily interactions? We have people going through all kinds of different situations. This crisis affects everyone differently. So teachers and students' families might be going through the trauma of having a family member who actually has the virus. They might be dealing with housing insecurity, food insecurity, any number of things. Maybe they have a device, but their internet is spotty, or Maybe they have their family members are essential workers and parents aren't home to help assist with any kind of at-home learning. There's just such a huge range of experiences that families and teachers are going through that there was no real fair way to both expect learning to continue as usual or to evaluate that learning. And so I think that was a really important intention that I think I heard from most people around the subject. And then, moving into making the decision, moving towards the credit, no credit option, and minimally not having a grade lower than where students ended in the middle of March when we stopped school seemed the most important. There's just no way to grade people after this. And we also had lots of students who had applied to school and gotten into our UCs and CSUs, and we wanted to make sure they could still go to those schools and that we weren't putting them in a situation where their acceptance could be rescinded or, and I know that that's a whole other topic, but making sure that our students aren't penalized in whatever way with grades or colleges because this is not their fault. And so compassion and empathy is sort of the rule of the game here right now in supporting our students and families.
Thea, I want to kind of kick it back to you. So as a public community college, CCSF serves over 70,000 students across several sites in San Francisco. The SF Examiner reported that City College of San Francisco received $7 million from the Coronavirus Aid Relief Fund, or Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act. Was that funding enough? What are the most urgent needs of CCSF to meet this pandemic head on? I think we've heard a lot of educational institutions may or may not have received some funding, and most often if they have, it's not enough. So kind of how will CCSF make up the gap in funding, and kind of what challenges is it facing as a public community college?
Yeah, wow. No, it's not enough. And the issue that we face as a community college is that most of our students are part-time. A lot of our students are part-time, and the way that they distributed the funding had to do with full-time Pell Grants. If you had a full-time Pell Grant, and most of our students do not have a full-time Pell Grant. So across the board, there were, I sort of looked this up before I came, $12 billion that was given to higher education. And a tiny, tiny portion of that was given to community colleges because 65% of community college students enroll part-time. And of course, speaking of empathy and compassion, they are more likely to be low income. They're more likely to be the first generation to go to college in the family. They're more likely to be people of color. They're more likely to be first generation in America, to Sarah's group. So they're more likely to be working, our students. A lot of them are more likely to be working full time, and they're more likely to be taking care of family members. So the $7 million is actually split 50-50 between aid to students and aid to try and assist City College itself, and it's nowhere near enough. And the way that we get our funding, I'm not sure how SFUSD gets their funding, but we get our funding based on enrollment. And of course, I think we're all going to be held harmless at this point, but it's really terrifying to see if you look at the group of people that we're serving and you're asking them to go do distance learning for the first time in their lives like that, you can imagine that there may be some hiccups or maybe, much worse than a hiccup. And a lot of our students, I think, are really suffering. And we've lost a lot of people. I have been sort of asking people for informal surveys on what's happening with their students as far as enrollment is concerned. And I got a lot of responses from English as a second language, which is not representative, I will say, of the school as a whole. But I will also say that a lot of their students are not opting, and opting may not be the right word, are not able to get online. So what could we use additional money for? Everything from certainly supporting our students to try and figure out what's going on. I would say this whole rush for the Chromebook and the hotspot is a little frightening because we need to make sure that we're doing things safely, especially with SFUSD and our students. And I'm happy, Stevon, to take that offline if you're interested, because I think it's a little bit dangerous that we're giving we're we're giving a lot of EMF to our students right now with Chromebooks and hotspots, and it's quite frightening to me. And we could also use it. Something that I want to focus on, and Tom Amiano has also stressed over and over again, is we're probably not going to get money from the state. As my senator said to me, we can't print money at the state level, which is true. But Schools and Communities First is a measure that is going to come before us in November. And I would urge everybody on this call to do everything that we can to make that thing pass, because it is for sure the only sort of largish help that I can see coming down the pike. So that's one thing we can do.
Michelle, I want to kind of talk to you about, as a public education advocate, as a mother of, I think, 3, correct? What have our elected leaders, school administrators, and teachers gotten right with distance learning? What have they gotten wrong? Are you muted? Let me unmute you. There you go. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that what our leaders in the district have gotten right was prioritizing some of these basic needs first. You know, as I was just mentioning before, we have families who have experiences completely across the spectrum, but what we do have to do is fill the basic needs first, and they prioritize that. The first thing, you know, the day that they decided to close schools was trying to figure out how to feed our students and make sure that no child would go hungry. And that was important. And then figuring out next how to get devices and internet access, hotspots, all of those things, and working with all the partners that they could to make those things happen were absolutely the right first things. And they were able to communicate those out quickly and to leverage the resources they could to do that. It did mean that we delayed some instruction for a while, at least formal instruction. And you know, there was, in the parent universe, you saw a wide range of responses to that. Some people felt frustrated because they felt that their kids needed structure, and why weren't the schools and teachers moving faster? And, you know, they were talking from their own experience and thinking like they were talking from their own experience. And the reality is we needed that time, and it was most important to get these basic needs met. And it was important that we allowed our teachers and everybody who works on instruction and all of the logistics that are necessary to run our schools had the time to put together a plan. This is not something that happens overnight. And so that was a necessary time, and then they were able to roll things out. I think that the initial communications were good. I think Dr. Matthews was good in the regularity of initial communications. I think some of the things that to be honest, like it's hard to do a lot of criticizing because we're in an unforeseen moment, you know, and I think everybody truly was doing the best that they could. Some things that we could work on and do better is like consistency across school sites. I heard from lots of parents across all over the city who some were very happy with how their administrators were communicating with them, teachers checking in, and then other schools were hearing crickets. And I understand why. Everybody has their own situations to deal with, and they were not required to do all of that. But the inconsistency caused people to compare situations and maybe criticize, probably also because they were feeling their own stress and their own situation, parents trying to work from home, which was really difficult when they had kids around, especially if you have small kids. So some of that consistency, I think, was a challenge for some people. But the communication generally has been pretty good. And then I think what will be really important as we're moving forward through the next month or so are setting expectations. People are starting to ask about what will next year look like? You know, what's going to happen during the summer? When are we going to start school? And I know it's really early to get answers to some of these questions, but being able to set expectations for families so they can know how to plan as soon as we're able to do that, even if we're talking with them mid-thought process before decisions are finalized, I think will be really important and helpful for families to plan and figure out how they're going to move through their own lives and deal with their own livelihoods, which are, again, in a whole array of situations. So
that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sarah, I want to talk about, you know, kind of where the San Francisco's education system was even before the pandemic. before the pandemic hit, there were articles around kind of the serious budget cuts that, that we were facing here. And so now that as the economy enters a recession and schools are facing about 15% less per student, according to a recent Chronicle article, how do you anticipate Thurgood Marshall will be pivoting to ensure students are still receiving a quality education? Sorry, you muted here? Yep.
Yeah, so it's scary that we were having some really serious conversations about budget cuts prior to this pandemic, and that there's a lot of unknowns about the impacts of this pandemic on our future budgets. Prior to the school closure, every school had their school site council summit in which they talked about what their priorities were for the next year. And in our school site council summit in early March, we had to make some really tough decisions as a community and be very, transparent that some of our core academic programs were going to need to be cut. And it's one of those conversations that you do not want to have with your community. Talking about, is it going to be senior seminar, our program that supports dual enrollment with City College? Is it going to be our electives and AP courses? Is it going to be some of our arts? And so, we are looking at major cuts for next year. We already know that we are going to have to reduce our family liaison and our attendance liaisons hours, as well as reducing some of our academic programming. And so that's pre-COVID. And, we hear some rumors from the powers that be that we should be prepping for additional cuts. And that is going to impact small schools like mine that have 7 period days, which kind of compounds our situation, to know that there's going to be a possibility that our kids are going to have gaps in their schedules next year. And that is on top of coming back from, a pandemic. And so I think we're trying really hard to think strategically about what it is that we can do to prepare ourselves to pivot, as you said, to reduce the impact on our students. We're always looking for ways to be more effective and more efficient with the resources that we have available. We've already asked a lot of people to take on different roles and responsibilities so that way we can leverage resources that we do have. One of the things that I'm hopeful that we can do is leverage amazing community-based organizations and strengthen some of our partnerships with those organizations to supplement in various different ways to help us out by providing expanded learning opportunities and additional student supports that might have to be taken away. But the reality is that we keep asking schools to do more with less, and it's just not right. And so I hope that our school district leaders can continue to work with our city leaders, and then just as a community, we can continue to fight for the resources that our students deserve.
Stevon, do you have anything to add to kind of what Sarah was just talking about in terms of the budget cuts and how COVID, is going to impact them even more?
Yeah, we're getting updates on a regular basis. Before the pandemic, we actually pushed in a lot of our conversations at the school board to reduce the impact on schools, and we initially were in a position where we thought we were going to have to do mid-year cuts, and we were able to school sites, and we were able to avoid that. Looking at potential reductions in the coming fiscal year. Our fiscal year ends in June, starts in July. So where we're at right now is closing out the year. Enrollment, as Thea was mentioning, is a large aspect of how we get funded, and we're not going to be harmed based on enrollment now. So, I hope to have a better update in the coming weeks about what we're going to be seeing. Everyone is hurting right now. A lot of people are losing their jobs, and our resources is based on tax revenue. So what we've seen out of the federal government with the relief efforts is really focused on how to keep schools whole. I've been joining a national effort with school board members across the country to push our Congress people, our state representatives to keep schools at the forefront, to involve our school communities and how we think about, keeping the country afloat. So I'll continue that advocacy at the national level. And, this is the part of being on the school board that no one ever wants to do, being pushed to be in a position to have to make cuts, especially for me, knowing that, like, I really valued my family liaison when I was in school. Like, these people are transforming lives. So that even to put any school in a position where they have to make these choices is really heartbreaking. And it's also the reality of the situation that we're in. One of the things I'll end on around how the situation was created with our initial budget deficit is partially related to the parcel tax that we passed as a city that was held up by a lawsuit. So we have a bunch of parcel tax money that's in escrow that we can't spend to fund teacher raises. And that was like a watchdog advocacy group that sued the district, which held up the money. So we spent it to our reserves, which was the catalyst for the deficit, along with some unexpected expenditures that we needed to do a better job of tracking. So, what I'm looking to do also in the coming weeks is to elevate that story, make sure people know who this organization is that helped put our district in a deficit, while also advocating nationally that schools are supported through this time.
Michelle, you wanted to add to that?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to add about the funding issues. One thing we do know is going through this, there are going to be even more needs coming out of it, right? And I imagine maybe we'll get to some of that sort of assessing. We're looking at a massive learning loss, similar, it's like probably going to be much more amplified to summer learning loss with what's happening this spring, but also just all of the mental health needs that our students are going to be needing. As you've already heard, our English learner students are especially struggling with remote learning, with all kinds of needs that our special education students aren't getting met in this remote situation that they also need. So there are going to be even more needs that we'll have to assess. And so I just wanted to throw quickly out a few things that we could use everybody's help on advocating for. Stevon was talking about some of the federal work San Francisco Unified is part of the Council of Great City Schools, who has asked for about $200 billion from the federal government in the next stimulus package to help with some of those needs. We need to make sure that very quickly, if you all don't know, schools are not funded similarly to other states where it's primarily property taxes, which is a much more stable source of funding. It's tied to income tax. And so the capital gains tax and, this top 1% are funding a lot of our education funds. And so it's really variable in these kinds of times. And so we have to, we need to address that long term, but we need to make sure that we are not funding just the floor, the Prop 98. So we need to advocate to our state leaders about that and make sure that our supplemental and concentration grants out of the local control funding formula are kept whole. And if we do receive any one-time funds, we need to advocate for those funds to be spent on the schools that have the most vulnerable populations, because they are going to have the greatest needs coming out of this. You already heard about Schools and Communities First from Thea that is going to be on the ballot. We have to all vote to make sure that that passes. And then the other thing, and I don't know where this is right now, but there's a Southern California Assembly member, Marsucci, who proposed a new target for education funding in the state. And I don't know if that'll go through, because it probably will see like maybe 15% of legislation passed this session as compared to years in the past. But it is to change the target in education funding in the state to bring us more in the top 10 of states all across the country, because California is near the bottom. And so that would mean adding about $30 billion to where we were supposed to be funded this year, which we will not anymore. But those are several things that people can help support and advocate to our leadership at the state and federal levels to get more funding to schools, because we're just going to have increased needs beyond what we already had. So just wanted to make sure I got that in there.
Michelle, I'll follow up with you so that we can get all that information and send it out to everyone. after
Great.
that. I'm going to ask 2 more questions to the panel, and then we'll get into some of these questions from the audience that are in the chat, just so we can make sure to hit those, because we're moving faster than I anticipated. But just to kind of reach back out to Thea here, some colleges have declared that they will not resume in classroom teaching until 2021. Have any conversations been had at CCSF as to what will happen with fall classes? And mute you here.
Thank you. And may I ask again, who announced that they wouldn't have any in-person classes?
Today, some of the Boston University BU.
Yes, we've been following this very closely, we being my family. I do have a kid at UCSD. Yeah, we've been following this very closely, and we have not made any decisions yet at City College. I think it's too early to make those decisions. I did mention that Gavin Newsom, we also, in my family, listen to Gavin Newsom at noon every day to see what his latest missive is. And you know, he's talking about starting in July. I don't know if that's actually happening or not at the K through 12 level, but summer is going to be for sure distance learning, as we call it, which to me seems like a euphemism. I don't know. I'm not huge on euphemisms. But after summer is absolutely on the table right now. I will say UCs are also in this kind of, they're saying that they're going to have some hybrid and some online. I am one of these crazy people who is really hopeful that we can all see each other at some point and meet each other and talk to each other and even shake hands and all that good stuff. So I would be one of those people, probably of the trustees, that would be advocating, if we can do it safely, that we do our best to, as much as possible, normalize our education system again. I just think there's too much riding on this, and there are too many people who are literally dropping out as a result of this new way of, you know, of online learning.
Sarah, do you have anything to add in terms of whether, for example, Thurgood will be able to come, you know, we'll be back to in-person teaching and in classroom teaching in the fall? Do you have anything can you shed light on that?
I have no idea. We have not heard what SFUSD is planning to do. I too hope that we are back in the fall, but only if it's safe for us to do so. Not want to put any of our students or families in a place where they're having to choose their safety over their education. But to Thea's point, there are students who are literally dropping out because the barriers are just too high. And the number of our families who have also just had to leave San Francisco, return back to their home country, or go stay with families in some other parts of the country. You know, not to say that opening our schools are going to help them relieve some of that financial stress or that other stress they're going through, but I think being able to be open and reconnected as a community does provide that extra layer of support that a lot of our families need. So I remain hopeful, but it's yet to be determined.
Stevon, I want to ask quickly, and then we'll move to audience questions. Many colleges had remote or distance learning as part of their modus operandi, which made the pivot for fully online classroom teaching much easier. What do you see for the future for high schools or, you know, primary or secondary education? How large a role will distance learning continue to play, you know, going forward?
Well, I think, yeah, I heard you. Yeah, I think that a lot of people who are stakeholders in our system, our educators and our families and our students, they miss school. You know, they miss being with their friends. They miss the interactions, the spontaneity. They miss running around. So schools aren't going anywhere. Our school communities aren't going anywhere, and people are yearning to have them back. When this, it was interesting, like, you know, my perception of my experience around this whole issue was that we want to follow the science. That's the type of thing we want to do, is follow the science. Educators were afraid that they might get sick, and parents were too. We all did the right thing with closing schools, but when you talk to people across the city, they miss their school communities. Like I went to John Muir to help them give out laptops, and the yearning to hug, you know, everyone was trying to like be refrained, but that's still real. That's still a part of us. So what I hope happens is that people find ways to fill whatever gaps, and they use technologies to support that. So it can be a great way to augment learning. But you know, the way that we associate ourselves to our school communities is still very much, I think, where we're at as a city and as a country. So that's my general perception on how technology will play a role, a way to augment learning, not replace the in-class experience.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I know a lot of employers are thinking about in the future, you know, some kind of ability to work remotely is going to have to be a part of how they operate their businesses. So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to move to the audience questions now. I think if we can keep responses to about a minute, we can get through as many of these as possible. And then anyone that wants to take it, you know, just, you know, raise your hand and I'll go ahead and unmute you. So how much of the roadmaps, the strategy to reopen schools is being coordinated at the state level and with local health officials? This question is coming from SI. Who wants to take that one? Stefan, go ahead.
It could be more could be happening.
Okay.
More definitely could be happening. When we hear news from the state superintendent or the governor, it's usually news to us also. So that's something that we need to address and improve. I'm trying to keep this to under a minute. Shout out Emily Marase, former colleague. Shout out to you. Shout out Lita Fisher. Shout out Armand. It's good to see all of you.
This is from Marivi. How will we manage the widening gap between kids who were unable to engage with online learning at all and those whose parents sought out online tutors and enrichment programs? COVID slide feels like summer learning loss times 10. Who wants to take that? Michelle? Okay.
I, of course, would be interested to hear from Sarah on this also, but it seems that we're going to have to find a way to assess what the situation is when we come back to school in the fall. And before I just quickly give a couple quick thoughts on that, what's been really clear when this crisis hit is that, and I think I've seen lots of people say this, so this is not going to be news to everybody sitting in this meeting, but this has laid bare all the inequities in our system. And so I hope we don't go back to how things were before. I actually hope we use this as an opportunity to make those, to elevate them more and address them more systemically, so they're not quite as wide the next time something else hits. So there's that. But as we move into the fall, we're going to have to do a couple of different assessments, you know, related to that learning loss. I mentioned it before, academic assessments, so we can figure out what supports need to be put in place to deal with that, because we know there's going to be slides no matter who you are, but especially for those who tend to have that experience that slide even more. But we're also going to have to do some sort of an intake assessment on the social emotional state of our students. Do they have all the basic needs that they need? Because in a few months from now, that could be a very different situation than it is today. And so we need to just put in some assessments, and I hope that the state can help us and guide us through that, put some of those assessments in place that we can use and districts won't have to spend their own resources on. And it just provides some support to that, but I think we're gonna have to put in some assessments to make sure that we're addressing the needs where they really exist and where they are the greatest.
Good. Sarah, do you want to add to that at all? Okay.
Yeah, I think Michelle is exactly right. I am really curious to see how the school district moves towards reopening, and then how the school district deals with the finances of doing so. I think that's going to really impact, you know, our ability as school leaders to design the best plan to support our students. But, you know, we are already in the process of creating assessments to kind of figure out where kiddos are at socially and emotionally. and, you know, sending out biweekly surveys to kind of get a, you know, a thermometer check of, you know, where kids are at. We're also looking to shore up some dollars for extended hours for a core support team to be able to keep working over the summer, to be able to keep supporting our most vulnerable students over the course of the summer, just kind of help tide them over until the start of the school year. But when the school year does start, I think that there needs to be a very real conversation with our staff about the inequities that do exist in a way that is motivating and inspiring, and, you know, we're in this together and we can do this, and in a way that's not, you know, defeating our staff to, you know, remind them of all of the inequities that already do exist. But for schools that serve populations like Thurgood Marshall, we need to just have some real talk that our kids in this situation are getting way further behind than the students on, you know, the west side of the school. And what are we going to do to rally as a community to help continue to push them back up? And how are we going to manage our resources appropriately in order to do so? But so assessment is first, and then being courageous in terms of reallocating resources that we have available to prioritize the students who need it the most.
I'm going to try and put together both Petra and Elena's questions. So how do we maintain social distancing in already crowded classrooms? Any initial thoughts there? And how can you address scenarios of alternative school schedules and childcare options? Those parents that have to work full time obviously rely very heavily on pre and after care. Does anyone want to address that? Sarah, go ahead.
Those are all the things that we're thinking about, and we just don't have answers for them yet because there's still so many things that are unknown. I feel a little bit panicky when I think about having to create some sort of like rotating schedule for students, and what that would mean for the student experience, the teacher experience, and the support staff experience, and whether or not it's actually feasible. We had our school open today, and we'll have it open tomorrow for students to come and clear out their lockers, and just the level of excitement that our students had to see each other. And it's like, nope, you have to wear a mask and you have to stand 6 feet apart, and being really serious about that. You know, it's going to be really hard. And so these are all fantastic questions to be asking. But, you know, we have to really take it kind of moment by moment as we get more information, while keeping an eye to the future, but not get overwhelmed as we kind of map things out.
This is from Brandy. What measures will parents need to take so that ed tech does not attempt to take over class curriculum in our schools? This has been a problem in other districts. I don't know if anyone has a thought there.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thea?
I thought Michelle was going to take first stab, but yeah, I think this is a big concern at City College. We have a lot of older students. Some of our students are, you know, upwards of 70 years old, and it has always been a concern at City College. And I think, you know, to some extent, exactly what Sarah, Michelle, and Stevon have been talking about leading with the compassion and the empathy, not necessarily with the technical fix, is a really good way to do it. We have, at least at City College, and my kids had a slew of fantastic teachers at SFUSD, and we have spectacular faculty at City College. And I think one way to sort of stay away from the quick fix, which I think we all want it and need it and all of that, is to go back to the people. And the people that we happen to have in San Francisco are pretty great. It is not to say that we couldn't, particularly at City College, and we're very focused on this, increase the diversity, particularly with the faculty, and we all can you know, do a better job of that at City College. But in general, I would say sticking with the people and not with looking for the quick fix is one of the ways that you can stay away from the ed tech.
Michelle, did you want to add to that?
I'll add a little bit. You know, I think that technology, and Stevon said this more or less a minute ago, that that technology can be a good thing, and it can be helpful in different ways of, it's for efficiency or creative ways of learning and teaching. And, and of course, every student is different and every student needs different things. But one thing that feels really apparent to me, I don't know about the rest of you, but to me, what has always seemed really foundational to education is relationships. Both the relationship with the student and the teacher and just other adults within the classroom with the student. And there's just no way that if we go completely to tech, that is still salvaged and still nourished. And so we have to continue to find ways to nourish and support those relationships that are built. And so as parents, that is something we can do. And it's something we do by supporting our educators, by continuing to listen to them and supporting them. But even just noticing how our own students respond when they're working with actual people. It happens in our own houses too, right? When we interact with actual people, it makes a big difference. But it seems really clear to me, the really wonderful stories I've been hearing over the last few weeks often are relating to the teacher who reached out to the student to check in and found out that yes, okay, they're safe and they have what they need, or just the relational things. Those have been some of the great stories. And so we can focus on that. We can elevate those stories and continue to recognize that that's how our students' needs are more met individually. So that's all I would say.
I'm going to try and wrap this up by 6:40. So I don't know if we're going to be able to get to all of these, but thanks so much for all, the engagement, all the questions. Next one. Coronavirus has disproportionately impacted San Francisco's populations of color. The Latino task force testing in the Mission found much higher rates of infection amongst Latino populations, more so than white ones, for example. This is from Armand. I can imagine that this is also true in education. How are education policymakers working to protect vulnerable and marginalized students in this difficult time? Let's take this.
Yeah, I appreciate the question and all the questions I've been scrolling through. We've had public health challenges in low-income communities of color for quite some time. I was talking to a city council member in Richmond, and he described the city as a hospital desert. They don't have a functioning hospital in the city. And you look at health disparities along racial lines. You look at Baby Hunter's Point, the rates of asthma, breast cancer, mortality rates. These health issues aren't new. They're being exacerbated by this disease, and it's heartbreaking. I was talking to Sophie Maxwell earlier today, who's always been a champion of the baby community and in our own personal lifestyle. Always had a huge emphasis on health, and so it's top of mind for us. And when we think about the how we support our communities that are struggling, it needs to be culturally competent. Like, we need to understand culturally, what's the best way to get information to people, how often to be in touch with people, how often to follow up, and it's going to require more of us with an ongoing message to not only flatten the curve in these communities that are more that are disproportionately affected, but having a serious conversation and policies around our ongoing public health issues that have already existed. So, I reached out to Dr. Nadine Burke's office. I don't know if people are familiar with her, but she was out in the Bayview, and she, very well-known pediatrician that's now the California State Surgeon General, to have a conversation with her specifically in partnership with other Black community organizations about how this is playing out in our neighborhoods and what we can do to address it. So I'm hoping to coordinate with her office to get that off the ground.
Does anyone else have anything to add to that? Okay. Moving to okay. I lost my place here. My screen is frozen. My chat's frozen.
Out to Phil Kim. Out to Tara for now.
So this is from JR. Why do so many local education leaders pit middle-class parents against low-income parents? It seems toxic. How do we get out of this paradigm? Michelle?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that is something that we see sometimes. And I think that by focusing on the common needs that we all have and recognizing that every student is their own individual, and they all have different needs. It doesn't matter what family you come from. I think is one sort of orientation to have, is that, every student has their own needs. I also think that it will help for all of us to take it will take an approach that educates everyone about the needs of the entire community, and is finding ways to work together to solve the challenges that the community is facing. And so I think that if you, as we were talking about earlier on in this hour, we were talking about the different experiences that each of us has. I don't have the same experience as someone else next door to me or across town from me or whatever. But the more that we can just learn about each other's experience, and the more empathy and compassion, that's the theme of the night, the more that I think parents will be able to understand each other across the district. And I think as leaders, we just have to take that orientation that every student has their own needs and every student is important. Again, the thing that I've been really loving from the district lately is that that phrase of each and every. And I think the more we can hold to each and every student will help. I don't know if that's very helpful, but it's a little bit how I've been thinking about it.
Okay, last question. Sorry, we can't get to everything. I don't want to kind of take over everyone's evening here. I know everyone has things to get to. This is from Alex Wong. Given the failure of the school bond in March, pre-SIP or shelter in place, and the new reality of elections post shelter in place, how do the panelists feel about the prospects of the schools and communities first act passing in November, and what should we be doing differently in order to help it pass? I know, Michelle, you talked a little bit about this, but if you could talk about some other items more as we close, or anyone wants to add.
Yeah, I can just talk for a minute. So schools and communities first. If you talk to the campaign folks, Ben Grief is the head of the campaign with Evolve California, and I was on the phone with him maybe a week ago, and he said that he actually thought that we were better situated now than we were before the economic crisis started to have the measure do well, because we no longer have this massive rainy day fund at the state, and we don't have, there's other things that are that demonstrate more of a need for education funding. And so he thought we were in a better position. He's also the campaign director and is there to cheerlead us and help us get through all of this. And so my personal opinion is that it's going to take a lot of work from all of us, every single one of us, to get that to pass. When we started having conversations about 10 years ago of closing the loophole with what this measure does, which is making sure that corporations are paying their fair share of property taxes. It doesn't affect homeowners, but that was just, it was hard enough to even get it on the ballot. And now we have it on the ballot, which is massive. So we have success number one, just getting it on the ballot. But every single one of us is going to have to talk to our families and our neighbors and our coworkers and anybody else to let them know what it is and what it isn't, because there's going to be a lot of money spent against this campaign by the Chamber of Commerce in the state and other businesses who don't want to pay their fair share of taxes, like Disneyland. So talk to people about it. And if you want to know how to get involved, contact me. The PTA is doing a lot around this. And there's lots of people, I think, in this meeting who know about it. So just reach out to me or anybody else who you've seen talking about it, and make sure you get the information you need to talk to your people.
We want to thank all of our panelists again, Stevon, Sarah, I think Thea's to drop off, and Michelle. You guys have been wonderful. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening and spending some time with us. It's been great to connect with you all. I apologize for not being able to get to all the questions, but you can tweet our panelists tonight. They are on Twitter, and you can kind of follow up with them. And if the panelists, if you can leave your your Twitter or your social media, whatever you're comfortable kind of leaving in the chat, I think that'd be great. There's a lot more questions, and folks would like to definitely keep the conversation going. And we will follow up with information on a lot of what Michelle was talking about in terms of the Schools and Communities First Act and some of the other resources, and to make sure that you have them at your disposal and can get more information. Again, if you're not a member of the United Dems Club, please, uniteddems.org, just, join our club. We'd love to have you, and we'll definitely be rolling out more programming over the next couple of weeks. Next week, again, we have an event on the 14th. So I want to thank you all again for joining us. Thanks to our panelists. You guys were great. I don't know if you guys have any final words. I think everyone should be unmuted. But thank you.
Just thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is really fun.
Great job organizing. Congratulations.
Have a great evening. We had about 75 people at the most on the call, so it was great. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.